Good evening, everyone. My name is Rhonda Sheridan, Co-op and Employment Services Coordinator for College of the Rockies. I would like to first acknowledge the Tanaha and Kinbasket people whose unceded ancestral lands of all the College of the Rockies campuses and Kootenay Employment Services reside on. I feel deeply honored to live, work, and play in this beautiful territory. Tonight's presentation is part of the East Kootenay Online Career and Job Fair 2022 and is brought to you in partnership between College of the Rockies, Kootenay Employment Services, and Work BC. Our team would also like to thank Columbia Basin Trust for their sponsorship of this event and Kootenay Rockies Tourism. A very, very special thank you to our featured speaker, Yat Lee. I am deeply honored to introduce our featured speaker, Yat Lee, disability advocate, inspirational speaker, and the senior accessibility consultant at President's Group. Yat was born with bilateral microtia, a congenital condition in which the outer ears are underdeveloped. Yat cannot wear conventional hearing aids and has profound bilateral conductive hearing loss. Despite a physical disability, he has overcome barriers to inspire others in the community. Wearing prosthetic ears and a bone-anchored hearing aid, Yat is a communication accessibility advocate. Over the past 3 years, Yat has spoken at over 100 national and local events about his lived experience, accessibility, and social change. While working at President's Group, Yat supports a network of change-driven BC business leaders to champion for more accessible, inclusive workplaces. In previous roles, Yat spearheaded numerous brand awareness campaigns to increase communication accessibility, from hosting national webinars to local events with American Sign Language and captions. Yat is committed to removing barriers for all persons with disabilities. Currently, Yat works as a senior accessibility consultant for the President's Group. Formed in 2013, the President's Group is a network of 25 change-driven BC business leaders who are champions for more accessible, inclusive workplaces. Leaders of businesses of all different sizes and sectors and business models are represented, and nearly 60,000 British Columbians are employed at the President's Group's 25 member organizations. Businesses committed to inclusion in the workplace are encouraged to join the community of accessible employers launched by the President's Group. To complement his passion for accessibility, Yat is a committee member for the Access Transit Users Advisory Committee, advising TransLink on improvements to the accessibility of our conventional transit services. Yat is also appointed by the Vancouver City Council to the Persons with Disability Advisory Committee and serves on the Transportation Subcommittee. Previously, Yat served on the board of directors of Assist List. Without further delay, I humbly now turn things over to you, Yat.
Thank you so much for the kind and warm welcome, Rhonda. You found a really great way to introduce me, and I'm so humbled to be here with everyone this evening. And let's begin by sharing my screen here. I get a thumbs up for to see my screen there. Wonderful. Thank you again, everyone. I'd like to first recognize that I'm joining today's virtual session from the city of Burnaby on the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking peoples. I'm grateful to live, work, and play here. And my pronouns are he, him. And for visual descriptions this evening, I have black hair, wearing a gold framed a pair of glasses, and I'm wearing a black sweatshirt with a background behind me today. A rustic background. I kind of wish I kind of owned this space, but I don't. It's a virtual background. And let's begin tonight with a story. I don't think I'd ever be here. And here's why. I'm profoundly deaf, and I was born without ears. Growing up, I often saw myself as an outcast. You know how groups that are homogenous tend to hang out with people that are alike? Well, no one was like me, and I was like no one. I wore my hair long to cover what I was told to be a very shameful thing. You see, when my mother gave birth to me, she did not know and recognize my condition right away. Pregnancy scans, testings, and examinations at the time in the late 80s were not as advanced as today, and somehow my condition was not captured in those examinations. Or maybe I just played a big fat joke and covered my hands over my ear during those ultrasounds, so I would cover my ears and possibly saying, the world is as noisy as it is in here. Well, my mother, after she gave birth to me, found out that very same day about my disability. And she was terrified. My family was not expecting an imperfect baby. What they have on their arms is a baby with tiny ears, something called microtia, a baby that couldn't hear, a baby with a cleft palate. Oh, and a baby with a bite that and a teeth and tooth that were not pretty. If every time I talked about my disability was like adding pebble of rocks in a cup, my cup would be pretty much filled to the top. And, you know, if it wasn't already full already, maybe I'll tell you that I grew up in a very, very traditional Chinese family in Hong Kong. And according to a study, due to Chinese etiological beliefs regarding disabilities, many Chinese families are resistant to seek out services like a therapist. And also because of these etiological beliefs, the existence of a disability is often seen as a, believe this or not, a punishment for an ancestor's misbehavior, or that the disability is due to the current family's disregard of their obligation to honor their ancestors. Well, because of that, let's add, 2 more pebbles into the cup. What I experienced as a child is guilt, shame, lots of shame. And I didn't know how to navigate this world that was really, really, really hard to comprehend. I couldn't hear well, even though when I was a child, they gave me these large hearing devices with a receiver wrapped around my chest. But I couldn't enunciate or speak the way that my peers or my parents would. But then if you think about it, how do you expect a child with profound hearing loss be able to speak when they can't even hear their own voice? So that's where you would put someone like me into signing school, right? Or a deaf school, capital D deaf. My parents said no. My parents insisted that I go to mainstream school. But then every time they applied for me to attend mainstream school in Hong Kong, I'd get rejected. But how do you say no, right, to this pretty face? They said, well, Mr. and Mrs. Lee, your child has a disability and is different. And because he's a bit different, he's unique. He doesn't really fit in here among all the rest of the students. I'm sorry, but he's an outcast on here. So I'm not allowed to enroll in a mainstream school. One more pebble to the cup. It is getting pretty full here. Well, let's take a quick pause from my story. We'll come back to it later this evening and go to why I'm here with you this evening. And let's talk about what outcomes you're going to take away from this session. By the end of the evening, I'm hoping you will learn something new. It doesn't have to be everything I say, but if you could take one thing from this session and remember it, I'll be really happy. There will also be a time for questions and answer at the end, and also sprinkle in between. Thanks to our moderators today, Kirsten and Sammy, we will have some interactive engagement sessions with polling as well too. So get your fingertips ready with your mouse to click on some of the polls that are coming up. And together this evening, we're going to talk about building a competitive advantage through inclusivity. We're going to talk about measuring for disability inclusion in the workplace. And we're going to talk about some tools to combat the stigma and implement steps to tap into people with disabilities as a valuable talent pool. And finally, I do want you to come out of this session feeling inspired about the work that you're doing today, and also potentially the work that you do. So you might ask me, yet, why are we trying to make progress on diversity and inclusion at a time when our world is so divided right now? And I'll say, great question. My response to you is, diversity is inevitable. We've seen attitudes over the past few decades show us that there is greater awareness, there's greater tolerance, and greater acceptance of diversity. We see this in your office today. We see these in offices, and we see this in your community. And we're living in a world that has never been connected as we are today. So we are starting to see that organizations are inquiring less about the value of diversity and inclusion, brackets D&I, since it's already been established as a baseline. Instead, what we're seeing is leaders of these organizations are hoping to see how they can embed inclusiveness into what they do on a day-to-day basis. So what does that mean, right? That means on your day-to-day interactions, such as having Zoom sessions, such as having in-person meetings, and providing access to those. And less on, strategies and processes and decisions. So let's go into some of these examples. And some of those examples look like ensuring there's accessibility in meetings. So for example, in your Zoom calls or MS Teams or Google Meets, you want to make sure there's closed captioning. Today in our meeting, in our session this evening, we have Susan Thomas helping us with CART, closed captioning for Zoom here. And it's absolutely terrific that we have such services. And with Zoom nowadays, it makes accessibility that much easier. And in addition to Zoom, you want to make sure your meeting rooms, for example, have assistive technology. It could be setting up telecoil options for persons who wear hearing devices. It could be among other things as well. And also, accessibility expands to the digital sphere as well. So that means making sure your internal websites, intranets, or even wikis are accessible for screen readers. And finally, we start to see that diversity and inclusion is a necessity. And today, by participating in this session, this career fair, you're part of a journey with a huge opportunity. Whether you've always wanted to tackle this topic, but maybe fear, perhaps embracing it because of, some of the difficulties around this topic, or you've always wanted to hire a person with disability, but you're not quite sure about the job accommodations you might have to provide for them. Are they expensive? Can I afford them? You may have those questions. Or perhaps you may be further along on this journey and you already have a strategy. This session is also for you. And in the next 45 minutes or so is where we'll be able to make some ground together. There will be data involved. So if you're a numbers person, you're going to gravitate toward that. There's also an interactive poll, so it's not just me speaking. So I promise you data, so why don't we start with that? Over 614,000 working age British Columbians between the ages of 15 to 64 have a disability. That represents 20.5% of the population. That means when you go grab dinner with your friends next time and you get a table for 4, one of you may have a disability. That means when you're in an office of 100, 20 will have a disability. When so many of us around us have a physical or invisible disability, this matters. Individuals with disabilities are equal in every way. And we have an important role to play in empowering their success through the creation of a more accessible world, a more accessible campus, a more accessible office. A few minutes ago, we added another pebble to the cup because I was not allowed to enroll in a mainstream school in Hong Kong. When I was 5, my family took the leap and immigrated to Canada. And British Columbia was a place we would eventually call home. However, it wasn't easy. While I eventually did enroll into a mainstream school in British Columbia, I struggled to speak because I couldn't hear. I had support teachers that worked with me for many years to teach me to speak, especially the hard consonants with higher frequencies like the S's, the H's, and the F's. And I was a strong, heavy nasal speaker because that's how I heard those consonants. So instead of S's, it was coming off as it was trying to come out of my nose. H's became F's becomes It was so hard for me because these sounds were so soft and I thought they would come from our nose. Well, I was wrong. So here you have a child full of energy, but struggling mightily with coping with his disability and often asking, why? Why, mom? Why, teacher? Why am I in this world? Asking why is important. And in many businesses, you're looking for profit, right? And it's what we call the multiplier effect. In other words, you want to know how your $1 investment will return $5, $10, or $20 in increased revenues, or perhaps decreased costs. So let's look at why hiring people with disabilities is good for business. The research from the President's Group have found and show that the diverse and inclusive workplaces have better business outcomes. These businesses are 2 times more likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 6 times more likely to be innovative, and 6 times more likely to effectively anticipate change. And associated with this research is what we call a positive social impact. When a company hires people with disabilities, one of the things it's doing is it's combating stigma. Oftentimes, there is stigma around the capacity and the employability of people with disabilities, and it's been one of the biggest barriers to their ability to secure gainful employment. So when a company employs people with disabilities and also measures it, you encourage other companies to do the same. You also provide an example on how it can be done. So imagine, just like a leader sets an example to their team, an organization or a business like yours can also do the same. And because this type of leadership lifts up more companies and more individuals than even one company alone could employ. So what does that mean again, right? Well, maybe think of it as a ripple effect. Now let's take, for example, an establishment like the Rockwater Steakhouse in Cranbrook. I'm thinking about steaks already, and I'm already looking forward to dinner, and I might be in between you and your dinner as well too. So steaks away. But let's say Rockwater Steakhouse. Let's say they make changes to their seasonal menu. Let's say they open up their best and most delicious top sirloin steak with delicious Caribbean lobster tail to their weekly special. The chances are people who would normally go to the competitor, I think Mr. Mike's in Cranbrook, are now going to come to Rockwater Steakhouse, especially if it's discounted. So when you see, local establishments like Rockwater Steakhouse commit to diversity and inclusion, potentially that means hiring people with disabilities, perhaps coming up with an inclusive vision statement. Perhaps that might mean making their website accessible. Well, the chances are its competitor, Mr. Mike's or whoever it may be, are likely going to do the same. So we see there's a strong business case to hire people with disabilities. However, there are still some stigma out there, which suggests that people with disabilities are hard to work with, that they're tardy, or that there's resentment from peers because of the perceived special treatment like job accommodations. But that's far from the truth. On the slide here, people with disabilities are great employees. research from the President's Group showed that there's 72% higher staff retention, 86% had equivalent or better attendance than their peers. And the last one, well, I'm going to let Sammy or Kirsten come up with the interactive poll here to see how well people with disabilities performed compared to their coworkers. So I want to see some interaction from the group. So go ahead and fill this out. How well do people with disabilities perform? Equal or better than their coworkers? 30%, 50%, 70%, or 90%. We'll give it a couple of seconds here for the attendees to take a twirl on this poll. All right, Kirsten and Sammy, how are we doing for some of the results? Are we able to do a drum roll and release the poll answers?
So far, we're at 81%. So we're just waiting for a couple more people to answer, but we're looking really good.
Wonderful. I wish there's an interactive drum roll here because I'm so excited to see the stats. There you go. Thank you, Sammy. I think this will be a good time for us to release the answers here.
So we've got 70% at 58% and 90% at 42%. 30 and 50% we're at 0.
Right. Well, there you go. So it's now popped up. So we have most of the crowd here think that is 70%, and a good number of you also say 90%. Well, and the answer goes to the 42% of the group this evening at 90%. Think about that. 90% performed better or equal than their coworkers. These numbers are actual evidence to suggest that people with disabilities are great employees. Especially now, as we are getting out of COVID-19 and this pandemic, and my fingers are crossed here, employees with disabilities can help your business adjust to the ever-changing workplace. People with disabilities are innovative. People with disabilities are adaptable to overcome barriers in their own lives and work. And many are primed for the remote work which COVID-19 requires. And many may prefer the temporary, flexible, or casual opportunities business need to fill gaps as we adjust to our operations. So really, it's not that hard. And the pandemic has shown us that accommodations aren't difficult, and they really benefit the employers. But what are these, benefits, right? And what do they do? Well, on this slide here, you're going to be able to see that the benefits include an economic benefit of 2 to 7 times the cost of accommodations for employees with various health disabilities. 58% of these accommodations cost nothing at all, and 37% of them require only a one-time expense of $500 for accommodations. Just to show you an example today, because I'm deaf and hard of hearing, I can't wear traditional headphones or headsets. I rely on what we call a multi-mic and a multi-clip, which connects to my bone-anchored hearing aid wirelessly. And this little thing costs $300, $350. But because of this, I'm now able to participate equitably in conferences, in sessions, and allows me to be in different virtual webinars that I otherwise would not have been able to. It opens up a world of opportunities. And finally, the findings here show that working from home or working remotely, like some of you are today, is one of the most common accommodation requests. And we now know, we can see it, that during the pandemic, working remotely is very practical for many jobs. So now I've been able to tell you the why, and hopefully I've been able to paint a nice little picture in Canvas. And I hope to you that embarking on an inclusive and diverse journey, such as hiring people with disabilities, is good for your business. Now, let me share with you how you can tap into this untapped labor pool and tap into the grants available to you today. One of the grants available today is called the Workplace Accessibility Grant, which provides direct support to small business employers in British Columbia by providing direct financial assistance towards creating an inclusive work environment for persons with disabilities. And this grant covers up to about $1,000 per business. And when we talk about accessibility, and this afternoon I had a call with another group as well too, is when we think about accessibility, we often think about the environment. We think about whether they are accessible for persons who uses a wheelchair, making sure there's wider corridors. And that's obviously, and also one thing you can tap your grants into. But there's also other things as well, like attitudes, practices, policies, information and communication and technologies. So that means, for example, if you want to hire someone to focus and change the attitude of or learn some of the attitudinal barriers, you can hire a disability consultant. You could use a grant for building workshops, for example. And there's also policies you might want to tackle. For example, on your HR personnel policy, you find out some of the information on your employee handbook, which may be outdated. This is a perfect time to tackle that. You may also recognize that some of your technologies are outdated and they're not accommodating to some of your staff members. That means you could purchase specialized headsets like this guy here for me, or tablets for communications, or even ergonomic keyboards as well. And again, this grant is administered through, I believe, April 30th of 2022, and they are on a first come, first served basis. And the maximum allowable grant is about $1,000 per business. I highly encourage you to tap into this if you haven't already. Another one I really want to be able to talk about today is a national organization, which is called the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work. And their job is to promote and to support meaningful and equitable employment of people with disabilities. And they are agents of change. They build partnerships, they develop skills, and they share knowledge, and they want to influence attitudinal changes to some of the barriers that someone with disabilities encounter. And among the programs that they have, one of which is job accommodation services. The Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work Job Accommodation Services, JAS, works with employers across Canada to create healthy and inclusive workplaces. They've been established since the early 2000s with a real simple goal of reducing barriers to both individuals and systemic in the workplace. So they do this by providing practical workplace accommodation solutions and advices. So what they do is they perform what we call on-site assessments to learn which workplace accommodations will optimize the performance and comfort of employees with disabilities. And their expertise extends to all types of disabilities, conditions, roles, and even work environments. There are other resources you can tap into today, and they're really close to you in Cranbrook. One of which is the Kootenay Employment Services. They are at its core an organization which is about people. And I've had a great opportunity to talk with Kirsten Renner here on this call, the Regional Community Development Manager, and they work with job seekers, employers, and community partners and funders to cultivate this genuine relationship to support organizations' beliefs and the important belief that everyone has the right to meaningful employment. Another one on the screen here today is REALM. Realize Empowerment, Access Life to the Maximum. And they've been around since the early 2000s. And they offer customized support for job seekers and employers, matching the individual's skills with employers' needs to create mutual beneficial opportunities. And if I'm not mistaken, they hosted their Inclusive Community Employer Awards last year as well to show that value of inclusiveness. And I get so excited hearing that because this is what exactly all our different communities, regional, rural, need to celebrate diversity. So great job, REALM. An inclusive employer also on this list here is Nexus Community Support Society. And they are a family-driven society formed in the 1950s to really advocate the inclusion of children and different disabilities. And they provide training and practical experience to help individuals succeed when it's time to find a job in the community. And their team also assists by talking to potential employers, coaching employees on the job site once they are hired, and advocating for their rights and responsibilities. So those three resources among the first two that I shared with you, the grants at Small Business of BC and CCRW, is what I really want you to tap into. If not already, then do so very soon. Now, accommodations are only as good as far when a person self-discloses. When a person chooses not to self-disclose, it's hard for businesses to provide accommodations, even if they want to. And self-disclosure was very difficult for me. I tried to hide my disability and when I was much younger and pretended to act like everything was okay when really it wasn't. In my earlier employments with different employers, I had too much pride to share, too much pride to self-disclose. I didn't want anyone to treat me differently because all I wanted was fairness. But the fairness and equity that I wanted wasn't there, even when I didn't share my disability. And the reason is, when I don't share, I don't build trust. When I don't share, I don't build connections. When I don't share, I don't build integrity. I recall one winter, I worked at Santaland at our local mall. It was my first work experience, and I was going to have so much fun. I didn't care if people told me that parents would start bunching in line, or if I heard one more story about how their kids are the best thing in the world to ever happen to them. I tried to channel that away, and I was going to put a smile on my face and work my butt off to ensure that families get their photos with Santa and to make sure the line is moving as fast as it could. Well, the first day I started the job, I was asked to wear a headset so Santa's little helper could communicate with each other. Ooh, I can't wear a headset because I don't have ears. I wear a prosthesis or prosthetic. So the only sound that comes in is absorbed through these silicone prosthetic ears. So I can't wear these headsets. And I'm too proud to let my peers know. And I recall, not directly, I think indirectly, telling my supervisor at the time that I can't wear a headset because I didn't want it to affect my job. So what I did was, and this is, I went to great lengths to do this. I meandered my way to make an excuse with my peers every single time I was asked to wear a headset. Sometimes I would just wrap it around my neck, like I had worn it for hours already, and that my ears were hurting from wearing it when it wasn't the case at all. And the reason I'm telling you this is I want to tell you that this story, because I was really willing to go far from telling anyone about my vulnerability. And after several stints and other roles, and even my dream job at the time as a communications professional for a crown corporation, I felt that, hey, I was on a path to an employment success. I felt that maybe I could cover this disability for the rest of my career. However, I recognize that in my role as a communications professional, I struggled with hearing on the phone. I struggled participating in online meetings. And what I gave was a false sense of aloofness, especially when colleagues tried to speak with me and didn't get a response. Not because I didn't want to give them a response, but it's because I couldn't hear them. At that Crown Corporation, my contract was not renewed and I was pretty disappointed. But thankfully, I found a new role before my contract ended, and I spent days at a time thinking about self-disclosure. Because when I was in those interview process for the new job, once again, I didn't self-disclose at the interview process. And I neglected to speak about the fact that I wear a hearing aid and could potentially benefit from some type of accommodations. And the reason is I was too proud. So after a series of interviews with the new employer, they gave me an offer. And I was so excited. I signed it right away and then hopped onto a job orientation a week afterwards. And in my orientation, the people and culture advisor gave me a very extensive overview and history of the company and the type of work that I'll be doing. But among the great things that she said during the orientation, I had one thing on the back of my mind. Do I tell her? Do I tell her I have a disability? I recall my palms were sweaty. I was nervous. And then she asked me at the end of the orientation, is there any more questions or comments from you yet? Just when my tongue was getting ready to say no, I somehow mustered the courage to say, yes, yes. The reason why I fear self-disclosing so much is, again, what I mentioned earlier, the stigma that I'll be treated differently, that I'll be potentially, in my head, discriminated against. And I had increased anxiety due to, or potentially anxiety or potential anxious moments that people are thinking about my disability or may even go as far as pitying me into social gossips. But it was because of that moment and the lack of transparency in my earlier employments that I really wanted to take the first step to becoming vulnerable, even if it hurts. Because I knew that one day I could be worry-free from hiding experiences, that I could take off my mask and be the colorful self that I am. That perhaps one day I could share these experiences as a living testimony against stigma and discrimination, and which is why I'm so honored to be here today to share these experiences with you. And so I told Sandra, the PNC coordinator or advisor, that I wear a hearing aid and have these prostheses. I told her. At the time, because of my perceived notion of self-disclosure, on the back of my mind, I was already ready to look for another job because they may not want to keep me, or they might walk away because they found out I had a disability. Well, even though Sandra was a bit surprised at my sharing, because she couldn't tell that I wore a hearing aid or have prosthesis, what she did was she made me feel safe. She made me feel that the employer values employees and their disabilities. So what she did was she immediately made it known to me that the president of the company also wears a hearing device. Whoa, right off the bat, I was very excited to know that someone in senior leadership in a presidential role understands some of what I may be going through. So from the get-go, I felt welcomed with this employer. And that's why it's important to assure that leaders of an organization understands that they are the ones that hold an important key to the company culture. Leaders who have great awareness can champion a more sustainable culture of inclusion. So if you're a leader today of an organization, you're also very much likely in what we call a member of an insider group. Because by your level in the organization, it could also be because of your age, ability, class, culture, gender, race, sexual orientation, and so on. Your status in the organization, mirrored with self-disclosure, can build trust, can allow you to lead by examples, like I shared with you earlier, and have shared basic assumptions. So this is very essential for organizations looking to improve their diversity, inclusion, and equity journey. So I spoke about disability most of the evening, but what is this definition of disability? According to the Canada Accessible Act's definition of disability, it means that any impairments, including a physical, mental, intellectual, cognitive, learning, communication, or sensory impairment, or a functional limitation, whether permanent, temporary, or episodic in nature, or evident or not in interaction with a barrier, hinders a person's full participation in society. So the purpose of the Accessible Act is to make Canada a barrier-free nation by 2040, not too long from now. And this involves identifying, removing, and preventing barriers in different areas like employment, the built environment, information and communication, like I mentioned to you earlier. It could also be communication, transportation, and also the recognition of the use of American Sign Language, Quebec Sign Language, and Indigenous Sign Language. So inclusion starts before a person is even hired, you know that. An inclusive employer makes a commitment to attracting and recruiting people with disabilities. So that means updating your inclusion statements, creating an accessible website, and making your marketing materials accessible. An inclusion statement on your website can tell people that your organization is actively making a commitment to supporting diverse candidates and can specifically welcome people with disabilities. An accessible website is also very important to candidates because so they can navigate the job postings. So this means also following what we call the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. If the website is not yet accessible, you may want to have alternate method of contact for candidates if they're seeking for a job. And now, of course, when employers are recognizing the importance of creating a diverse workplace culture, hiring people with disabilities is absolutely good for business. So next time you are on your website, take a look at your mission, take a look at your visions and values, and see if there's an opportunity to talk to your team, to talk to your senior leadership, to put forward a disability inclusion statement that reflects the core values of diversity and inclusivity, and values really that resonate with the current public. So again, more than ever today, it is absolutely vital to have social value tied to your brand. At one point, diversity and inclusion was a point of distinction for companies. But now, it's rapidly becoming a point of admission to the market. So being able to measure and report on your company's employment of people with disabilities is an absolutely valuable proof of your commitment to providing social value as a business and also a caring culture as an employer. So there's an absolutely opportunity for you to tap into this untapped labor pool. So we mentioned earlier that nearly 620,000 working age British Columbians have a disability. And in fact, before COVID-19 outbreak, at least 28,000 of them, people with disabilities, were unemployed but wanted to work. So when employment rates for people with disabilities are half of what they are for the rest of the population, we need to recognize that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted people with disabilities in terms of income, risk of severe illness, and the quality of life. So that means there is a greater opportunity today to center this untapped labor pool as our economy hopefully recovers. So let's hop into our final engagement pool here. Let's see, on average, how much it costs to hire a new staff member. The options are $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, and $5,000. right? We'll give it another 20 seconds here. All right, how are we doing here, Sammy?
Good so far. We're at 83% of people voted. Just gonna give it about another 5 seconds and then I'm gonna share the results here.
Thank you so much. And the virtual drum roll. Wow, it's quite spread out here. You've got 20% suggesting 2,000, 25% suggesting 3,000, 35%, which is the majority, suggesting 4,000, and a couple of people here said 5,000. Well, the answer is, oh, let's see here. $4,000. $4,000 is the amount it costs on average to hire a new person. So having a great person on staff who will stick around is a pretty compelling argument, right? To tap into this labor pool. And according to this study, organizations who took part in it suggested that there's more intangible benefits of employing people from this group, which includes increased job satisfaction, improved work climate and culture, better relationships with colleagues, and a shared sense of responsibility, as well as obviously seeing some massive improvements to their organization's reputation. So again, hiring people with disabilities is not as difficult as some employers might believe. A recent study actually by the Mental Health Commission showed that across 4 case studies, organizations saw an economic benefit of 2 to 7 times the cost of accommodations for employees with various mental health disabilities. So as you embark on this journey, I want you to follow some guiding principles. I'm showing you 3 on the screen, but there could be more that you come up with. And these 3, I believe, are pillars of every organization and should be followed some way or another. The first one, nothing about us without us. I see some heads nodding because I know some of you have already come across this phrase. It is used commonly by the Disability People's Organization as part of a global movement to achieve the full participation and equalization of opportunities for, by, and with persons with disabilities. So in plain language, yeah, what does that mean? That means including people with disabilities into your strategic planning, into your 5-10-year outlook, into your employee resource groups, including them. Don't not include them. That's what this phrase means. Number 2, the second definition is the definition of disability. How does your organization define it? And which model will your organization adapt to? There is the medical model, there's the social model, there's the difference model. What I'm showing you on the screen is the social model, which the Canadian Accessible Act follows. And I definitely follow myself because it identifies that it's the systemic barriers, it's the attitudinal barriers, it's the social barriers that prevent people with disabilities from gainful employment. And lastly, one other guiding principle I want you to follow is your vision and mission statements. I want you to make sure they're inclusive and that you lead by example. So on the business side, there is plenty of evidence-based businesses suggestions. There's a quote from Peter Drucker that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So if it's important to your business, you want to be able to improve it. And our long-term, data gives, organizations the ability to make informed decisions and help meet their business goals. I think, for example, it is standard for businesses to track quarterly profits to help their leadership and staff to make decisions, right? So based on these numbers, an organization might double down on a marketing campaign, or perhaps stop manufacturing a product that's not selling. But if you think about it, the same logic can apply across their operations. So if you have a business goal to hire more people with disabilities, actually, when you keep track of how many people you have on staff anonymously who identify as having a disability will help you meet that goal. And there's also other benefits you can achieve by measuring disability. In fact, a measurement initiative presents an opportunity for you to improve your organizational culture. On the communication side, it's also collecting demographic data about your workforce and reporting back on how it's being used. And all of this work is sending a message to your staff that diversity and inclusion is a priority for your organization. So the key is to clearly communicate why you're collecting the data, what you plan to do with the information you gather. So asking questions and listening to your employees is absolutely vital, and it's a foundational part of building what we call a high trust culture. And employers who engage staff in authentic ways and listen well have a high return on investment with their measurement campaigns. And also, it's also a competitive advantage, right? If you're looking to differentiate yourself from competitors, just like the Rockwater Steakhouse I mentioned earlier, it could be an opportunity for you to move yourself into becoming the leader in this industry. And as a collective, we recognize that there are important benefits that a movement to measure can achieve for the public. And data helps us to raise awareness, identify trends, and improve employer and policies makers of understanding the issues faced by people with disabilities. So it's important to measure. And lastly, I think it's also important to raise awareness because there's stigma around the capacity, just like I mentioned earlier, becoming my greatest barrier and hurdle to my secure of a long-term employment in the first place. So again, data from employers, from potentially you in the future, can create more concrete evidence that people with disabilities make valuable contributions to their workplace. And you know what? Building a relationship with your staff means creating a two-way dialogue. So you want to empower your employees, you want to communicate your values, you want to set those expectations and articulate each individual's role in achieving a common goal, as well as listening to their feedback. And employers can do that by creating what we call the employee resource group. Having an employee resource group opens the discussion to help everyone in an organization see new perspectives. And when it's done really well, it helps your organization understand your internal biases and behaviors. So one way, obviously, to do this is to create this. And these groups are created around a specific identity or experience within the workplace. And one identity is a person living with a disability. And this employee resource group could be an avenue for staff members to connect with other staff members, support one another, grow through professional and personal development opportunities as well. And these ERGs, we call it, can be valuable feedback tools for employers hoping to address barriers for a given group and can also draw some attention to your measurement initiative. We see that some organizations like ICBC, BCAA have employee resource groups and it's becoming integral and becoming an admission to entry to an inclusive employer. And finally, there's also other organizational cultures to improve on. There's building, there's creating the employee resource group. You want to also identify what we call the unofficial leaders and influencers. You want to create more opportunities as well. And the bonus solution is to create a safe space for your employees. And you want to be able to one day be able to measure and to share those numbers on your website. And the last set of numbers I want to share with you today is the Pledge to Measure measurement from the President's Group. The President's Group in 2021 conducted what we call a Pledge to Measure initiative and took data from 21 participating employers, which consisted of nearly 50,000 employees. And of those 50,000 employees, nearly 2,000 of them self-identified as having a disability. And 110, which is a big number here, self-identify as a senior leader. So that means 110 senior leaders potentially understand the importance of providing a diverse and inclusive culture to their environment. And businesses leading this way in measuring for disability are really motivated by two key drivers, regulation and values. And what I have here is regulation. The BC Accessible Act came into ascension last year, and most recently, the Provincial Accessibility Committee is formed. And this act allows provincial government to establish accessibility standards aimed at identifying, removing, and preventing barriers to accessibility and inclusion. So that means culture changes, focusing on culture changes throughout, working closely with stakeholders and the public to increase accessibility. That also means standards development. They're going to develop standards and implement them in a phased approach. And this is a very robust 10-year plan from the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. And if any of you are interested in obtaining this guide, a guide from the President's Group, which is 78 pages long, you can hop onto that website, which I'll drop a link into the chat group later after the session here, is to get this guide, print them, or get the printed copy of them as well. There's really rich information on why it's important to hire people with disabilities. And before I end my session today, I do want to take you on this journey to not overlook digital access. Your digital storefront, your website, and your apps. You want to make sure they are accessible. And some of these practices include keeping your design simple, making sure there's high color contrast ratios on your website, and also remember that guiding principle I told you, nothing about us without us. You want to hire accessibility testers to test your website, whether it's for content or whether it's for user experience. And a web color contrast tool I use is this color contrast checker. It's a very handy tool, and if you simply Google, I believe, Web AIM color contrast, you'll be able to have access to this. And of course, you see the WCAG requirements, and on here you see whether you're passing those levels or not. And passing these levels are super important when it comes to user experience, because you'll have different types of clients and stakeholders accessing your site using different assistive text like JAWS, lip-sync hands-free devices, Dragon, screen readers, voiceover, or tabbing, or various types of disabilities as well. And one thing I want to talk about is accessibility overlays. They've been very, very popular, especially with the new ADA compliance legislation in USA. And I find that companies have been quickly going into these overlays and using them to meet standards. But accessibility overlays fail to serve people with disabilities and do not make the websites more accessible, especially for the blind or for people with vision impairments. And they tend not to comply with the web content guidelines or functions as intended. And oftentimes it's because on mobile devices. And some of the reasons include that these overlays needs to be browsed around on a website before being able to be activated. So what I mean is a user who uses an assistive device has to learn a new skill, have to learn how to use this overlay instead of using their own tools. So for example, a user with low vision who uses a screen magnifier may use the same screen magnifier when browsing any website and can activate it seamlessly. On my screen here, these overlays, however, have their own predefined actions and functions. So the user with low vision now must have to find out how to turn on and configure the overlay's magnifier, rather than being able to use their own existing pre-configured tool. So as you can see, there are risks of using these accessibility overlays. Another risk is automation. Automation may not be able to address every potential barriers in what we call the critical user flow. So imagine if you are a e-commerce shop and you have a cart and there's an order and you have a purchasing system. And then someone wants to select an item, place it in the cart and enter their payment and shipping information and to complete their purchase. But if one step of that process is not accessible, then it's rendered the entire purchasing system inaccessible. So automation clearly is not addressing every potential accessibility barrier in a critical user flow. So again, it's important to make sure your website is accessible. So I do hope tonight that I have been able to inspire you to take one giant step forward to making your workplace inclusive and diverse. From someone that has had his cup full of pebbles, full of challenges, full of societal barriers, I encourage you not to give up on this journey. Embrace this privilege of being able to unlock and to remove these barriers for your community and to be a beacon for yourself and others. So be sure to get in touch with me after this session. You can follow me on several social media channels. I have Twitter, LinkedIn, and I also make videos on YouTube and sell custom ASL art on Etsy as well. So it's my pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yat. That was wonderful and inspiring. And wow. I would like to, I'm sure our audience has some questions for you tonight before I formally close things. So please, do we have any questions in the chat, Kirsten?
So far, no questions, but we had a comment on the disclosure that also when you don't share, you are not being true to yourself either.
100%. I also think there comes a time, depending on where you're at on your journey, I do think that some people may not be there yet. And we must respect that. We must respect their decision. And that's why, and the reason why is potentially because of the societal barriers, the stigmas, the potential, ridicule they might, potentially face because they're opening up themselves, they're being vulnerable. And it's not an easy thing, and it's an admirable job for those who self-disclose. But one thing I believe in is employers and our nation and places we visit must make their environment, must make their society barrier-free, so we don't have these thoughts anymore that people should prevent themselves from self-disclosing. So great comment there.
Wonderful. One of the questions yet, there is a large percentage of businesses in British Columbia are small businesses, mom and pop operations, people with less than 50 employees. So can a small business really make a difference in diversity and inclusion?
100%. All it takes is a small community to get together and to make a difference. You know, I know there are large organizations, but small businesses represent, if I'm not mistaken, the last time I checked, 98% of the economy in British Columbia. So when you say, can you make a difference? I say I have 98 different reasons to say, yes, you can. So just think about that. You can make a difference because when we have smaller ERGs, it's even more powerful. When we have groups coming together with an inclusive statement, you're more likely to see other of your clients come to you. If you're an ice cream shop and you have a statement that says you are inclusive, you are diverse, and you hire people with disabilities, the chances are the community and people are more likely to shop with you and buy ice cream from you than another shop, like, for example, a larger, company, for example. I'm not going to name any names here. So I think, yes, absolutely. You can make a difference even as a small business owner.
A question comes up from now and then. What do you predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years? And what are you looking forward to in the next 5 years in this space?
I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to start seeing some policy changes really impact and really remove these barriers for people with disabilities. I'm very encouraged by the Canada Accessible Act. I'm very encouraged by the Provincial Accessible Act. I think as these acts come into formation, as more regulations are implemented and policies are implemented, for example, like fines, for example, for not being in regulation, can really change an organization's perspective into things. So obviously, when there's skin in the game, that's where organizations will start becoming more aware, because right now some companies are, but some aren't. But I do believe in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully by the 10th year, that there's less discussion about how to make your workplace accessible, but more so, why are you not already accessible? Because we had all this time already to work on this. So I really hope we get there one day.
So you've really inspired us today, and you've had a lot of presentations. You've inspired a lot of people. How can they get started?
You get started by taking on some of these suggestions I told you, working on those guiding principles, defining them, defining your mission statements, defining, including people with disabilities into your strategic plans, into your 10-year plan, 5-year plan, 1-year plan, including people with disabilities into everything that you do is where you get started. Hire accessibility testers for your website. Bring on someone from the Rick Hansen Foundation to do an on-site accommodation check. And don't think that it's going to be a mountain or a hill to climb, but more so tap into some of the resources I told you about earlier, the grants, the jobs, the JAWS, for example, from CCRW, and tap into some of the resources from the Presence Group as well, too.
And we have another question. What is your advice for older deaf people trying to get into the workplace again, but feeling discouraged from past negative experiences?
Thank you so much for your sharing of the lived experience. I think that's where the some of these social service employments will really come key in to support you, whether that is through intervention with the job coach, whether that is working on your resume. I think someone like Rhonda will be fantastic to provide support with that, as she has told me about some of the resume sessions throughout this career fair. I think there's also now a real good access to ASL interpreters as well. So should you be looking for ASL interpreting virtually, I think it's really accessible to get one from the Western Institute or from the Island Deaf and Hard of Hearing to access those interpreters for some of these work. I think really you want to be able to tap in to those disability employment services to support you in your career.
And another question. What is your best advice for someone who supports individuals with disabilities in their work, as well as supporting a family member who has a diagnosis as well? Feeling like I'm drained as a parent.
Oh, that is very common. And I want you to know that you're not alone. I want you to know what you're doing is the best for your family. And I just want to give you 2 thumbs up. If I have a third thumb, I'll give it to you right now too, because what you're doing is admirable. And don't stop, because you clearly understand some of the hardships, but because of you, you're opening opportunities to your family, your peers. If I can give you an inspirational injection to this is, just think about some of the opportunities once you work with these disability employment services and providers. Potentially, there will be opportunities you haven't seen before. And clearly, before I self-disclose, I wouldn't have this opportunity to speak with you. But one giant leap of faith, self-disclosing, I now have that experience to be able to share. So what you're permitting your family is this experience and this journey is not easy, it's challenging, especially when you feel alone, when you've been bullied, for example. But just know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and you are being an amazing person to your family, and don't stop doing that.
Wonderful. I don't have any questions right now, but if anybody has any more. Oh, Sammy, you have your hand up.
Thought it would be good instead of being interruptive. I thought of a question. I'm just wondering, for a person that has disabilities, when is a good time to self-disclose? Would it be before, like in an interview, or after the interview when you know you already have the job?
Great question. If you asked me 10 years ago, I would say never, right? But I think even when I was in that corporate hotel job, I self-disclosed after the interview process, just because, oh, now they've given me the offer, I've signed it, they probably can't get rid of me now, right? But again, it really depends on your comfort level. Some will choose to disclose from the get-go. Some will choose to disclose later because they have an acquired disability as well too. But for me right now, I'm at a stage where I'm really comfortable self-disclosing from the get-go. And that really helps because it eliminates any questions that may come forward afterwards, whether you need accommodations or whatnot, because I do value those who self-disclose from the interview process, so I know right away where I can provide accommodations from the interview process. It's also an opportunity for your employer to know that you're very much aware of your disability. You understand your own accommodation, so they know, oh, wow, this person is taking a leadership role in teaching me as the employer what I can do to provide accommodation, what I can do to be a more inclusive employer. So from my perspective, I think you should self-disclose from the get-go if you're comfortable.
Thanks, yeah.
You're welcome.
I was just going to say a comment along with that, if you don't mind. I know for myself, I disclosed a disability once to an employer, and I was very, very nervous about it. But it actually ended up benefiting the whole team. It was a job where we had to stand all the time, and I have a disability with my leg. So sometimes I need to be able to have an option of sitting down or standing, depending on how I'm feeling. And so I disclosed that. And they actually gave stools to all of the staff, so that it felt not just that I needed it, but like everybody was super happy because we could all benefit from it as well. So sometimes it is great to be able to self-disclose, feel comfortable, and have other people also feeling that.
Great example, Sammy.
Last call. If there's any other questions you have yet right now, you can ask away.
Okay.
I think the steak is calling.
The steak, I myself am hungry already. So, but I just wanted to say thank you for Rhonda, Kirsten, Sammy, Jen, and the organizational group to organize this really important discussion. I think I'm very honored. I'm very honored to be here with you, but I can't be here without some of the great supports from my family, from my supporting teachers. Sure, there's challenges. Sure, there's a lot of work involved, but the people around me made this possible. My partner makes it possible for me to empower myself. So I'm really grateful, and I really hope today you were able to pick out something new. I hope I was able to inspire many of you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Yat. On behalf of all of us here this evening, I would like to sincerely thank you for this incredible, powerful, informative, and inspirational presentation. Thank you to all of you who attended this evening. Your participation means you are part of making a more inclusive and diverse community in the places we work, live, and play. We hope you enjoyed this presentation, and this recorded session will be made available on the College of the Rockies and the Kootenay Employment Services website within a couple days. We hope that you will share the link with others in your network to inspire them and who you feel would benefit today or in the future from this presentation. And if you would like to have the links sent directly to you, you can email careerfair@cotr.bc.ca. And thank you again, Yat, so much, and all of you for coming out tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your steaks. Good night.
Good night.